Hi there, it's Kareem from Keeper's Nursery, and I'm making a short video about how our trees are grown in the nursery and the changes that take place from when we plant a rootstock like this in the ground to when you receive your fully grown maiden, and that all takes about 20 months. So to begin with, what we need is rootstocks. Now rootstocks, as some of you know, are basically default fruit trees, as it were, which you can graft the variety, the wanted variety, the desired variety onto. So different rootstocks have different properties. So again, they are varieties which are cloned. So each one is, if you buy a rootstock like M26 or M9, each one is a clone of the original M26 or M9. And those rootstocks will have dwarfing properties, which are useful for growing smaller trees, or you could potentially have a rootstock to make a large tree. Here is one of the pear rootstocks. This is a Pyrus rootstocks, which unfortunately had a snap in it, so that's why I still have it. It hasn't been planted in the ground, but this demonstrates exactly what a rootstock is. So we received several thousand of these each year from a good reputable rootstock supplier in Holland. They produce very good rootstocks on the continent. Not many Brits are actually producing rootstocks yet, although hopefully some do in the future. Now, a rootstock is basically a stick. It's already about 2 years old and it's got a small amount of root on it, which will eventually become a lot larger. But it needs to be a small amount of root which we actually prune back so that we can plant them in the ground quite easily. And I will show you in a second where we plant these. But I'm just going to demonstrate the difference in the size of the roots between the rootstock on the left and the maiden that you buy on the right. So this maiden, this is an MM106 maiden. It's got quite a large root, so that's my foot. There's a size 9s, maybe 10s, I'm not sure, but yeah, it's quite a substantial amount of root. That's good anchorage. It means that the tree will, when you plant it, will be able to sort of establish relatively quickly. You'd like to have a nice amount of root. If you do buy a tree on, let's say, M9, it's going to have substantially smaller roots on, because that's just a dwarfing rootstock. So as you can imagine, a more vigorous rootstock is going to have big roots. A more dwarfing rootstock is going to have smaller roots, and they are more brittle as well. And you can see here on the tree, here is the rootstock section, and that right there is where the graft union is. Go on, focus camera. The graft union is here. I'm not sure why it's not, but anyway, that's so let's continue with this journey. I'll bring these with me. So right now it is the end of March 2024, and this is the new plot of area of land, let's call it, where I have planted all these rootstocks. So there's about 7,500 rootstocks here. That took about four and a bit days to plant. So they're nice straight rows of rootstocks planted 35 or so centimeters apart. The rows are about 2.4 meters apart, and as you can see, nice straight rows of trees. Now these will be grown on in these spots, and they will be on sale in December. So these will actually be grown and then grafted, chip budded this summer, so that will be August 2024, and they will be on sale for people to buy in the 2025 season, so that's next season, and they'll actually be dug up and shipped out in the winter, so starting December 2025 moving through to about March 2026. And our trees are actually dug up basically a few days before they are sent out, which is quite unusual for a nursery. The reason we do this is it produces a much fresher, well, the trees, rather than going into a cold store, the trees are effectively, there's less disturbance in the roots, which helps establishment. I don't have a cold store to store the rootstocks in. I'm prepared to do a lot of more physical work since I'm still a young lad, so It is more work digging up the trees weekly, but we also have so many different varieties and so many different rootstock combinations that it just wouldn't be feasible to basically store them, because let's say there might only be 3 of a specific, or less than 3 sometimes, maybe 2 or 1 of a very specific, unique sort of combination of rootstock and variety. And I mean, imagine trying to store that. You'd need a library, and you can damage trees quite easily if you store them somewhere. Also, my goodness gracious me, mice and voles would destroy those trees. So going back, so that's that big plot of land where I have all those rootstocks. So I will work those until, like I said, the end of next year. So that, and here, this is where trees will go for next year. So we do leave some land fallow, probably only using about half the land I have or less for production at any stage. This is quite important. You don't want to overuse your land. You want to sort of let the land heal. Also, if I used all the land, I would never see my wife or children, so that wouldn't be very, very fun for anyone. Right now I'm just walking over to where there are some examples of trees that I now will call 1-year-old trees, even though at the end of this year there will be 1-year-old trees like this maiden. But these are trees that are at the sort of midway point, as it were. So they've been with us for 12 months, and this is what they look like now. So these rows, you can see the grass has now been allowed to grow between the rows. These are double rows. Some of those rows that you saw at the in the muddy plot up there, they're now single rows. I'm trialing to see if it's better to plant in single rows since I have the space. But over here you can see these are some plum trees. So these have now been cut. So the top of the rootstock has been cut, and in its right here you can see where the chip bud is now growing. So that's a chip bud there. Yes, it is finally focusing. So that's the chip bud there, and this bud here is what will become the new tree. So this bud will put on, so I don't want any of these lower buds, but this bud up here, I will allow it to grow to a good sort of 5-6 feet this year, and that's what it will do in a year, and that is fantastic growth. Usually the plums will come out earlier. These apples over here, the buds will still be dormant, so you can't really see any growth on these. I'm very sorry if the camera's not focusing, it's misbehaving today. Having a day off. And I'll quickly just show you what the rootstocks look like after a year of growth, so you get your eye in as to what they look like just before I've cut them, because that will be quite useful for you to see. So this is basically the production of chip budded trees. You can also basically buy your rootstocks in the winter time. You can do a bench grafting, so you can do like winter bench grafting on them straight away and then plump them in the ground with the graft on. You may potentially be able to actually produce a tree in a single season. I know a friend of mine who does this in France. You can produce great looking trees after a single season rather than waiting the second year. But then there are sort of complications in doing this, in that I'm very busy in the winter actually sending out trees. Today is the last day that I'm sending out trees this year. I would not have time in winter to do this. Also, I have time in the summer to do chip budding. There are pros and cons of sort of doing chip budding as opposed or winter bench grafting. It's really, at the end you end up with a relatively similar tree. Chip budded trees tend to be better, but bench grafting has its benefits as well. I'm not as sort of au fait with bench grafting, but I'd say chip budding is a much faster process. It requires less scion wood. It also, like I said, because you're doing it in the summer, I'm using up the time that I have available, so it helps me to do that. But different setups will have different reasons for doing things in different ways. And if you can produce a tree in one season rather than two, it's good. You have to understand that if you do that, you won't get as big a root on the tree. I hope the camera actually swung by and showed that. You won't get a big root on the tree like you do if the tree's already been in the ground for 20 months. So you know, swings and roundabouts, as we say. So over here, this is a very similar section of the nursery as to the one I just showed you up there with the plums. Some of the tops have just been cut, and here is an example. These are M9s here, and I believe those over there are M26s. So finally, to show you what they look like, these are, the top bit will all be cut off. So you see these have all been cut off, and I still have a few more to do, but I'm waiting for dry weather. Probably only about 300 left, which out of 7,000 is good. So that's a sort of rootstock in my hand as it's planted. You see how much thicker it gets over the year when it's established. You can see it's nicely anchored in the ground. What will then happen is here you can see where the bud is, where the chip bud is. There you go, camera, you know what you know. Awful stuff today. But anyway, underneath this buddy tape, that's where the bud is. I can show you on one I've done earlier, as they say in Blue Peter. Here's one I've done earlier. Goodness, come on. There you go, bit of help. Anyway, there you go. So that's what it looks like. And then that will effectively grow up into this. So this would be underground more, but that entire this graft union here, this sort of wound bit here, that all comes from that one bud that you saw there. So the entire tree is basically dependent on this bud surviving. That's why we use things like slug pellets at this time of the year, because slugs do like the wet weather and they do like the bud, and they will go straight after the bud, and effectively you've lost the tree, and that's not good if you're running a business. You know, we do use herbicides and pesticides in nursery. Now, you know, you have to sort of keep an open mind about these things. They're not necessarily sort of inherently evil as some people perceive. They're a tool. You know, we use hydrocarbons to drive our cars. Those are extremely bad for the environment. We use you use materials that come from the other side of the globe sometimes. Herbicides, pesticides, they're an important tool. Used responsibly, they are very effective. It doesn't sort of necessarily mean that you know, I'm not at all against sort of the environment or, you know, the soil. I wouldn't use a herbicide or a pesticide irresponsibly, but you can't really run sort of a business sustainably without them. So please bear that in mind. I don't want to get sort of, I don't want people to think I'm bad. Most nurseries will use them as well. It's just, you know, I should be open. We do use them, and they are, you know, effective when needed, but we don't overuse them. Anyway, back to the important stuff. Yeah, so that tree will all grow. The only other thing I'm pointing out here is we do use canes. So canes are used to effectively protect the tree from breaking in the wind. And recently we found, so here are some quince trees growing. Quinces go into leaf extremely early. Go on, go in focus. Anyway, we do need to protect the trees from breaking in the wind, so I need to cane every tree. That'll take a few more days. So trimming the rootstocks takes, let's say, 3 days to do. Planting the rootstocks is a 2-person job, which takes just over 4 days to do. This is all for about 7,500 trees. Cutting the tops off and caning is probably another week and a bit, and then it's just watching the trees, protecting them from all sorts. But also we don't irrigate these trees anymore. These trees, because they were irrigated in the first year, so that in that muddy plot up there, those will be irrigated. Down here we don't need to irrigate the trees at all anymore, because there's plenty of roots. You see, once those roots establish, they really get going, and the tree basically looks after itself. We will probably have, I mean, this week we've already had 15 millimeters of rain, but we will have a very dry spring, as we usually do. There'll be about 2 months where we don't get a drop of rain. So
you know, you do need strong roots to establish, and we don't get the most rain and sun. If you do have a fruit tree nursery and it's on the continent in Europe, you may find that because you get continental climates, it means you get much warmer summer, probably about 5 degrees warmer than we have it here. You'll probably also get more rain. Those trees will be larger, but you know, you can only grow what your climate allows you, and our trees are, you know, plenty big. A sort of 5 foot maiden is big enough in my opinion. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, please ask. I will make more videos about what goes on in the nursery, because I think it's good to sort of show that I'm a hard-working guy who genuinely loves his trees and is, you know, works quite hard to produce good trees, and hopefully, you know, customers appreciate this. Thanks very much for watching. Take care, bye.